Good afternoon. This is Live at the Waterhole, coming to you from Africam and Wild Earth TV. And my name is Liam Burrow. I'm the fortunate naturalist that gets to chat you through a couple of these, hopefully, quite exciting waterside scenes over the next 2 hours or so. Kicking things off this afternoon by the looks of things, very close to Skukuza Rest Camp in South Africa's world-famous Kruger National Park at Kruger Shalati. Anyway, before we get too carried away with all of that, I'd like to remind you that we do try to keep these shows as interactive as possible. So please keep your questions, comments, thoughts, etc. coming throughout the show. Director Luyanda, as well as myself, are standing by, hoping to you. But yeah, certainly a very warm, low-felt afternoon here in Kruger Shalati. So perhaps a little bit unusual to be seeing a hippopotamus, a normally highly nocturnal animal, up on land doing a bit of grazing. Hello, Joan Mello. Happy Sunday to you as well, and nice to have you on board with us. Make yourself comfy, stick around. Yeah, as I say, perhaps slightly unusual to see a hippo walking around out on land, especially this late in the day. And they do the majority of their moving around on land under the cover of darkness, largely, in fact, due to their sensitive skins. So prolonged exposure to the sun can be pretty disastrous for hippos. But I think what we're seeing here at this time of the year, as grass is kind of in shorter and shorter supply, this hippo has got to put in extra time to collect enough food to survive. So perhaps he's not getting quite as much as he needs in his nocturnal grazing missions. Thankfully, though, he is very close to the Sabi River, within a couple of meters. So should he get too hot, he can always pop back into the water. That's a very cool start to our afternoon. Hello, Darcy Miller. Hello, Mercedes. Nice to have all of our regulars, or many of our regulars. Hello, Paul Burton. Coming to us from the UK. Yeah, let's see what Live at the Waterhole has in store for us today. As we know, it's pretty unpredictable, and that is the nature of this kind of live wildlife content. But anyway, I think it is time to have a quick look at what is in store for us in terms of the weather. Yeah, so it is certainly looking like a pretty warm, dry day across much of sub-Saharan Africa and all of our live locations there. Perhaps the only location that might be in for a bit more rain would be Old Donyo. And our thoughts are with everybody in Kenya and Tanzania dealing with pretty significant flooding due due to heavy rain. Yeah, we hope everybody up there is managing it. All righty. Well, speaking of your, uh, now to head over there, I see something quite special. There. Our apologies from the team here at some small difficulties today. But of course, some birds and airs for eagles spent a bit of time doing this behavior. Spent a bit of time watching doing this exact behavior at Albania yesterday afternoon. Nice to have him or her back once again. Yeah, sounds like everybody enjoying this. Darcy Miller, Miller, always nice to see a little bit different. Looks like just finishing up with his bath now. Time to shake off all of that excess moisture. Probably head up to a nice perch somewhere in the sun and do a bit of feather care and maintenance. It actually is. Also a cool opportunity to check out those talons. Very sharp claws, in particular those at the back. Killing tone. Otherwise, doesn't look like too much going on here at Aldonio, and that, I guess, can be expected. After such heavy rainfall, there will be a whole lot of water available out in the bush, meaning that densities of animals are not really so concentrated around these artificial anymore. Now, still, though, we're bound to get a few thirsts, and as we approach the hottest period of the day, kind of 1 to 2 p.m., which is where we are now. Cumulus type clouds, of these region has been affected by a deluge in recent weeks, resulting in some pretty serious flooding in a lot of places. Certainly, it's creating difficulties for conservation efforts, as well as people just trying to go about their day-to-day lives and stuff. So, yeah, thankfully, these things don't ever really last too long. They stay safe for seasons, and hopefully that's going to be the summer in this environment. Apologies, once again, we are trying to troubleshoot things with my audio and hopefully this picture. But touch wood, hopefully we've moved away from Old Donyor now, leaving our Ayers Hawk Eagle. Once again from Tembe Elephant Park in KwaZulu-Natal, right up on South Africa's east coast, with a rather magnificent looking Nyala bull. He's just enjoyed a bit of a drink and now exiting stage right. At the beginning of the show, we also had a number of large elephant bulls around the water's edge. So if they're not, there we go. I knew they would be around somewhere. Now that is a proper party right there. The chap on the left is a particularly large animal with some very well developed tusks. The genes for large ivory seem to be of very high quality. And here in Tembe, it's quite a special elephant population. Only a couple of hundred call this reserve home, but they are kind of the vestiges of an ancient population that once ranged between these southeasternmost reaches of southern Africa, as far north as places here and Tanzania. That was at one stage an ancient elephant migration route, which elephants would be on, I guess, infinitely. However, these days, obviously, the situation has changed. There are a couple more billion people calling Africa home. Certainly there are locals in the way. Border fences, so animal movement is certainly not what it was. Thankfully, though, this population is well monitored and certainly well protected, giving the elephants the benefit of some safety to go about their business. And thankfully, for the greater elephant population, the theory goes that female elephants choose the male that they're going to mate with and to have father their young based on his physical size, the height of his, the width of his head, and the length. So that these very tusked bulls are some of the most popular males in the environment. So hopefully out there somewhere are elephant calves carrying the genes to produce these very big, impressive, mammoth-like tusks. Juliet has asked an interesting question. Hello, Juliet. She asks, would the elephant get more nutrients from fruit rather than grass and leaves? Yet, I'm not 100% to be honest with you. But, all material is relatively low in protein, that sort of thing. In mind, elephants obviously being herbivores have the ability to break down or plants. Ellies do get basically everything they need from fairly sparse vegetation, and certainly at some times in the year, when all the leaves have died, even meager pickings like bark and roots is enough to sustain them. But they will, of course, supplement their diet wherever it is available with things like fruit. I think, though, fruit with their high sugar content is probably more of a seasonal treat than a staple for things like our African ellies. Darcy Miller says elephants always have such a peaceful look when they are mud bathing. Absolutely, Darcy Miller. On yesterday's program, elephants always give me this incredible feeling of like de-stressing and relaxing out in the bush. I read quite an apt quote that time spent with elephants commands the same silence reserved for great fires, mountain peaks, and I think that's seriously apt. I think for us as humans, there's a sense of something we have no control over, and much like the power of the ocean. When we look at something like a herd of elephants, may it stay, they are, after all, a force of nature. Alrighty, well, I think it's time now to head up to a new Live at the Waterhole location for me. Let's check out Tembo Plains Camp on the Zambezi River in Zimbabwe. So we are live now right up in the most northern tip of the country of Zimbabwe, north of us here in enormous troop. The buck, the little antelope in the foreground there. Yeah, certainly a slightly hazy picture, but a wonderful opportunity to see a massive amount of these baboons going about their business. Yeah, as I say, this is my first look at this Tembo Plains camp. I actually wasn't even aware we had access to this, so that's very cool. Zimbabwe is actually the country that I was born and raised in, so my neck of the woods. Might have to check some content here. So baboons, many of you will know, are omnivorous creatures, feeding on a wide variety of different things. The vast majority of which, though, much like ourselves as humans, is plant material. So they're happy fruit, roots, a bit of times are very tough, and then of course a huge array of protein as well. They are awfully partial to birds' eggs, baby birds, insects if they can catch them, and occasionally even something like a or a they're eating baby antelope on 3 separate occasions in the Greater Kruger. So it certainly happens. Sure, this is a vast quantity of baboons, a huge troop. In some parts of Africa, a single group can be as much as 100 individuals, ruled by a gang of quite violent and aggressive dominant males, with top male baboon in pole position. However, there is constant infighting, so males are battling each other all the time within that sort of upper tier, the top gang, for that pole position. A very well structured hierarchy. Fights can be pretty often with terrible wounds inflicted to their forearm, often missing ears. Wounds are inflicted by 4 or 5 centimeter long canine teeth, rivals in terms of size of a lion. But yeah, don't mess with a baboon. That can be awfully serious. And as far as southern Africa is concerned, they are our largest primate species, with males sometimes approaching 45 or 50 kilos in weight. We get any chimpanzees or gorillas this far south. They go up to equatorial Africa towards the Congo rainforest, places like Rwanda, the Ivory Coast, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Those are the kind of places where you'll find bonobos, chimpanzees, lowland or mountain gorillas. Darcy Miller says, baboons are very intelligent in my opinion, and I love watching the different behaviors. They Darcy Miller, as is true of the majority of primates, even these baboons, which are a lesser primate species. So they're not a great ape, like a chimp, gorilla, and orangutan. Those are some of the most intelligent animals on the planet. Certainly baboons are up there. And quite frighteningly, perhaps, share, and those I'm speaking about, they share something like 5% of our DNA. So we are pretty close relatives. And we certainly see similarities. Alrighty, I'm just going to cue a bit of a silent segment here so that we can continue to troubleshoot consistent issues with the audio here. So just bear with us. Alrighty, well, hopefully that has helped. I'm not 100% sure what else we can do to try and improve that. Again, these images and this feed is coming to you from some remote locations. Hence the difficulties sometimes bringing this content to you in good. But thanks for sticking with us. Hopefully that's a little bit better now. Now you might think this troop of baboons would be quite vulnerable out in the open, but what you've got to keep in mind is that baboons, especially in a group like this, can be quite a formidable force. It's well documented that baboons, when they have strength in numbers, will even take on predators. Things like things like leopards. Certainly it's well documented these guys will attack and kill fairly large domestic dogs. My parents tell stories before I was even born of seeing a large troop of baboons attacking a group of cheetahs on our wildlife property in central Zimbabwe. So yeah, they're precious things. And they are, however, quite vulnerable at night, hence heading up into trees to roost. Yeah, they're certainly on the menu for things like leopards occasionally. And I guess things like lions as well. But being out in the savannah with their phenomenal vision, they've evolved stereoscopic vision, which basically gives them the ability to plan movements in incredible 3 dimensions. You can think of it being quite useful when they're trying to leap branches jutting out in all directions as they ascend into a tree. But those stereoscopic eyes are also very, very good at spotting something like a predator crossing this open savanna towards them. And of course, in a group as big as this, there are lots of pairs of eyes out there to spot danger. And very often they also strategically place members as sentries, as kind of watchdogs, positions around the outside. So there is definitely a system there. Lucy Moore, a good question as well. Hello, Lucy. Lucy asks, would you say their alarm calls are more reliable than kudu? Lucy, I think I probably would say that. Working as a guide or a naturalist, if we are out in the bush tracking a predator in particular, something like lions or a leopard, you do hear the call of primates, things like baboons and which very distinct calls when they spot certain different types of predators. Very often it is worth inventing those alarm calls because those primates don't often make mistakes. As I say, very, very good eyes. And Joan Mello, absolutely, certainly a big troop of baboons. This whole sort of Zambezi River area is a phenomenal place for these baboons to make a home. Lovely hardwood trees, many of which will fruit at different times throughout the year, provide them a food source as well as a safe place to roost. And this is a big reserve. Timber Plains is in 128,000 hectares of the Sapi Private Reserve. Once again, right up on the northernmost fringe of Zimbabwe. Yeah, unfortunately, the country of Zimbabwe has obviously experienced quite a bit of difficulty in terms of its political situation in recent years, but it still has a whole lot to offer in terms of tourism potential. Some of the finest wilderness areas, the likes of Mana Pools and Wangi National Park are after all here, and they need our support. So well worth it if you are a safari traveller to look at planning a trip up to one of these magnificent places. Yeah. Alrighty, well things seem to have stabilized somewhat, so let's head over once again to one of my favorite locations at Old Donyo in southern Kenya. Beautiful. So back over at Old Donyo again with the arrival of a couple of Maasai giraffes, and feeding quite nicely on the acacia trees, which they're so famously connected to. Yeah, as I say, up here at Old Donyo, we haven't been seeing so much activity in terms of the big, heavy herbivores that we do see when things are much drier here. And that is largely thanks to the availability of water spread throughout the landscape after such heavy rains. It's something that we see wherever we operate as naturalists in the bush. Yeah, this is after all the time of plenty. There is food everywhere for the wildlife. Food, water. So numbers are bound to be a little bit less dense. But fear not, the sightings are out there. And in point. Always so cool to see these magnificent Maasai giraffes. Now these both look like females to me. I'm seeing very fluffy ossicones, very fluffy horns on the top of their heads. Yeah, always a good indicator are in fact looking at a cow. Alrighty, well, while we wait for these giraffes to emerge a little bit more from acacia and bushes, let's go to Kwamaritani to check out some more large herbivores. So we are live once again from Kwamaritani in the Pilanesberg National Park, in kind of the northern sector of South Africa, with a group of elephants also enjoying in the waterhole by the looks. Isn't that nice? Now this water does look quite stagnant, and yeah, perhaps not the freshest and nicest to drink. And in truth, in recent shows, we've actually viewed a large hippo bull resting in the water here. And hippos have a habit of defecating in the water that they rest in throughout the day. So if that water course is not flowing, if it's not something like a river, the water does tend to sort of fester a little bit. See lots of bubbles there, I'm sure, from methane. So yeah, this probably wouldn't be the best place for elephants to drink after all a killer when it comes to the water that they actually consume. But still a very good of a splash. And you never know, there may be a point off screen here, some pump out of the ground where it's a bit less stagnant, where they can actually quench their thirsts. And it looks like we popped in here just at the right time. And these guys may just link things up. Given the opportunity, most African savanna elephants will engage in a bit of this mud bathing activity at least once a day if they can. Yeah, you wouldn't think it would be an issue for such a thick-skinned and iconically African animal but they are remarkably sensitive to the sun. And prolonged exposure in very dry conditions, it does lead to them suffering a bit with sort of a dry and cracked skin. Giving us quite cheeky elephant body language there, that head held high, ears flat out, trunk sort of curled with a bit of tension. I wonder what he saw. They can be a bit silly sometimes. Sometimes it can be something as small as a bird or a terrapin around in the mud. But you never know. It could always be something like a predator. But off he goes into the thicket. Amazing that these absolutely vast mammals, sort of as plain as the nose on your face, can just vanish into the bush like that. And they also move remarkably silently as well, thanks to a pretty unique foot structure with a big cushioning pad of cartilage. Yeah, I'll chat to any naturalist that has spent any real time out in an environment where elephants occur, and they'll tell you stories about how they've been snuck up on by big elephants. Yeah, it's a bit mind-blowing. No, doesn't seem to be too much else out there. Just our eddies. And what a spectacular landscape it is here at the Pilanesberg National Park. A stark contrast to the greater Kruger. It's quite mountainous, it's a bit drier. But elephants, being the adaptable creatures they are, this is paradise for them as well. Provided there is ample water and ample food, and that they are not persecuted by people, Ellies live in a whole host of different environments, from coastal forests to deserts in some parts of southern Africa, and then into the savannas, woodlands, and forests where we expect them. Alrighty, well, in the absence of these large grey pachyderms here at KwaMaritani, I think it's time to check back in with our giraffes in southern Kenya at Uldoyo. And that is a nice clear view of one of these Maasai giraffes. Again, quite clearly a female, and we can deduce that simply by taking a look at those ossicles, or ossicones rather, on the top of her head. And we don't call them horns because they aren't really horns. They are bony protuberances that lack that keratinous sheath that we see on things like buffalo and many of our antelope species. So, ossicones. It's also one of the only animals, if not the only animal, in the wild that is born with a fully developed set of horns. But quite miraculously, and again that's thanks to Mother Nature, another natural marvel, those horns or ossicles are actually not attached to the skull when the giraffe is born. And they're cartilaginous, so made of the same stuff as your ears or your nose. And they kind of lie quite flush with the giraffe's skull, which I'm sure is a blessing for that giraffe cow, which she's got to force that calf through her birth canal. It's only about a week to 2 weeks later that the ossicles actually stand erect, begin to attach to the skull at their base, and begin to ossify, to transition from cartilage into bone. But those of the cows always stay quite skinny. They kind of curve inwards, forming that little circle shape between them, and they're always fluffy on the top. Bulls, which fight for the rights to these cows, end up repeatedly breaking those horns, which re-ossify, they recalcify over time, becoming much thicker, and ultimately they get quite bald on the tips. So if they are bald, thick like beer cans, standing straight and erect, they belong to a male. Joan Miller says, Africa is beautiful, so many animals to see, especially the landscape. Absolutely, Joan. Yeah, we do obviously try and look at these live at the Waterhole as well as the Wild Earth shows wherever possible, as holistically as possible. So it's not all about the animals, as much as they do take focus. It's nice to look at a bit of scenery, check out the trees, and wherever possible, spend a bit of time with small stuff if we can find it too. I've got an especially big soft spot for things like the butterflies, the reptiles. Always got time for a bird or two. Now the birds landing at the water's edge there, I think, were the red-billed oxpeckers that we've just witnessed landing on that giraffe. And in the background there, that is our Ayers hawk eagle, the bird that we briefly witnessed finishing up his or her bath. So a very ominous looking silhouette there in that umbrella thorn acacia tree. Quite magnificent. And now these Ayers hawk eagles to some degree are monogamous birds, but on 2 occasions now, today and yesterday, we've viewed this bird around the waterhole on his or her own. So I reckon it is probably a single individual. So hopefully it can find a mate out here somewhere and pair off. And the exact extent of monogamy amongst birds is not 100% understood, I don't think. Monogamy is the idea, and certainly this concept has proliferated in the safari industry, that birds of prey will only mate with one individual for their entire life. So should their mate die, theoretically that bird will never raise a family again. It will live a lonely life until it dies. Now, biologically, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Certainly, I understand that they bond very well, and that they're very loyal to one another should their partner exist. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that that an individual would grieve like that forever, especially considering some of these eagles can live lives of up to 60 years in the wild. So yeah, while they are monogamous, I don't think it is as strict as that. Anyway, perhaps this giraffe will come down and have a bit of a drink at the water's edge. That would be nice. Let's see what happens. And aren't those eyelashes, as well as that very dark greyish blue tongue, impressive features on this giraffe cow? Now, it makes perfect sense, I guess, to hear that those giraffe eyelashes, some of the wiriest and bushiest around, have evolved to protect those giraffes' eyes from the plants that they actually feed on, which makes total sense when you think of the giraffe's relationship with those very thorny acacia trees. So well-protected eyes, and then a very large, long, a greyish-blue tongue. We're not exactly sure why it's blue or grey in colour, but our thoughts are that it possibly adds a level of protection to that tongue from damage to the sun, because the giraffe spends so much of its day with its tongue actually stuck out, trying to kind of weave its way into pretty spiny, thorny branches. The tongue is also lubricated. Whoops, that's an impala that I think gave her a bit of a fright. The tongue is also lubricated with a saliva that has the consistency of maple syrup, also protecting it from thorns. Luyanda says a very spectacular entrance by that impala. Yeah, these giraffes are certainly quite nervous around the water's edge for obvious reasons. Probably their most significant predator in the wild would be something like a pride of lions, which do kill giraffes, even adults, on occasion. And very often those lions situate themselves purposefully quite close to the water, hoping to catch a thirsty herbivore. So yeah, you'll see from all of her body language, she's very alert, not 100% sure, and often it can take them 10 or 15 minutes to cover the 100 or so meters down to the water's edge. Slowly, slowly. Diane in the UK asks a good question. Good afternoon, Diane. Are giraffes members of the antelope family? So, Diane, giraffes are kind of in a family of their own, and they're not really that closely connected to the antelope. In actual fact, they only have one relative in the wild that is not a giraffe, something called an okapi, which, if you don't know what that is, it's well worth a Google. OKAPI. It's a much shorter, but also admittedly quite long-legged and long-necked species that occurs in equatorial Africa in a few select places. As some of you may have seen them in zoos, though, in places like Europe and North America. It was long thought that giraffes were possibly connected to things like camels. I think perhaps because of the way they move. They have this funny gait of sort of swinging both legs on one side forwards at the same time. Very similar to the way a camel strides across the dunes. But in actual fact, no connection whatsoever. And they might visually be somewhat like a camel, but not a camel at all. And lots of birds as well. Butterflies in any normal summer, especially out here in Africa, are fighting something of a race against time. Many of them only have a single season in which to complete their entire life cycle. So the big burning priority there, once they are mature, once they've metamorphosized from their caterpillar stage through their chrysalis, emerged as a butterfly, is to race around, collect enough nectar for energy, and then very rapidly locate a mate, do some mating, lay some eggs, and pass away, leaving behind eggs which will hopefully hatch with the onset of the rains and the next time the wet season comes around. Yeah, but they are such a spectacular and splendid explosion of colour on this landscape when the rains do arrive. It's always one of the big lights of the summer for me. Yeah, this giraffe certainly still quite tense. She keeps giving these sort of flicking, jerking of her head, which is possibly a visual signal to the other giraffe that she has seen something that she's not quite comfortable with. Probably still those impala. Impala are around about the same sort of shape, especially if they are a bit obscured by the vegetation, to kind of trick these giraffes to suspect that they may be something like a lion. We see them doing it with things like warthogs as well. Very confused and very focused, quite nervous around warthogs. And quite formidable predator occasionally. They are easy game, they're no pushover. They're one of the only animals in the world that is able to kick out in basically any direction. So while they can jab backwards with those powerful muscular hind legs like a horse, they can also jump legs out at right angle to the body and even swing those tremendous pendulous legs out forwards like a battering ram. And with enough violence, if a hit is direct, to kill something like a lion, or certainly a person. And a few people are killed in Africa by giraffes each year. Anyway, we may leave our slightly skittish giraffe cow now for a quick trip much further down south to Tembe Elephant Park once again. So back over at Tembe, more splendid summer scenes here with our big elephant bulls, I think, catching 40 winks here in the shade. Nyala directly behind them, and a herd of impala further off on the left there. The rainfall across much KwaZulu-Natal province in which Tembe is situated has been pretty ample this year. Hence all of this lush green grass, plenty of standing water. So times are good on the east coast. And we're really lucky here around Tembe. The almost routine sightings of So these ellie do have the ability to have a nap on their feet. However, it is a common fallacy that adult elephants don't lie down at all under the right circumstances, and I'm sure when they are very tired, they will absolutely lie flat on their sides on the ground for a couple of minutes at a time. It's funny in our field guiding industry as naturalists how incorrect information kind of proliferates sometimes. And certainly the way I was educated confirmed that this story that elephants don't lie down was the truth. And anyway, I operated as a guide 6 years with that information in mind. And then we sat in a sighting of an immense 6 or 7 ton muscle elephant sort of looming over us. And I had literally just said to my guests after somebody asked how he just leans up against the tree if he needs that. And The mammoth 6 or 7 ton animal pulled up his trunk, lay down like a Labrador right next to the vehicle, and promptly fell asleep. So we live and we learn. Still, elephants don't do a whole lot of sleeping, to tell you the truth. Out of a 24-hour day, they probably spend about 18 to 20 hours at a time collecting food, and their sleep requirements can probably be met in short 5 or 10-minute power naps spread throughout the day. Of course, much of that feeding activity goes on into the dark. Them being led with a tremendous sense of smell. Hello, Randall in the UK. Randall has asked, would you say this is one of the best birding areas in SA? Certainly, Randall. As we know, where there is life, KwaZulu-Natal and a number of these areas, phenomenal places to come and see some very special birds. A very good field guiding friend of mine runs quite a successful birding business out of KwaZulu-Natal, leading these birding types of things. Other good spots are places like the Pafuri region in the Kruger National Park, right up close to the boundary with Zimbabwe. It's an excellent place even to see things as rare as the Pell's fishing owl, believed to be around 120 individual birds left in the entire country, so they're very special. Alrighty, well, speaking of elephants, I think let's hop back over once again to Old Donyo, where the first elephant in a while has showed up there. Magnificent. The African elephant bull has just popped up here at Old Donyo. Now that might have actually even been what these giraffes were getting quite nerved. And we had a really harrowing sighting this African feed. It wasn't during live at the waterhole hours, but it was captured by one of the zoomies at Africam, I believe, of a musty elephant bull, and I'm thinking it might actually even be this individual. That rip in his right ear is quite familiar. And he saw a big giraffe was just peacefully trying to jump, and the giraffe sort of ran off frame. But chatting to somebody who works here at Old Donyo, they said the giraffe died like minutes later, so it's obviously a horrible wound. And very unusual. And they can obviously be with other herbivores, but we don't often see them inflicting fatal wounds on things like giraffes. Very weird. Joan Mello asks, or says, it must be hard for Ellies to get up after laying down though. Certainly, Joan Mello. It's not a one push kind of movement. So I guess there's an element of vulnerability as well for an elephant when it does lie down. But being the biggest and most dominant species in any of these landscapes, I guess amount of safety by being so large. But our bull is off the scene, and maybe our giraffes will emerge now that he's given them a bit of space. Alrighty. Well, in the absence of any big things here at all, let's head back over once again to Timber Plain in baboons. So a few thousand kilometers south of Old Donyo, where we've just been checking out that elephant bull. We are sat once again with a large troop of Chacma baboons and doing a bit of grazing and foraging on the plains. So apologies once again. I believe we have been having some more difficulty with a bit of audio break up here. We'll keep an eye on it, see if we can do whatever we can to minimize it. But yeah, our baboons are still very busy with their daily activities here at Timber Plains. And now that a lot of the vegetation is drying out and fewer trees are fruiting, these baboons are encouraged out into these savannas to collect what is left of some green shoot, roots, and perhaps the occasional beetle, slug, grasshopper, maybe a little tortoise, something like that. They are, after all, highly opportunistic. Joan Mellows, I never knew baboons ate meat until I saw a clip of them eating a baby impala. Absolutely, Joan. So it's quite well documented amongst a number of primates that will actually supplement their diet with meat, with animal protein. Yeah, it also gives indications that our earliest hominid ancestors, as has been long believed, also hunted and gathered. So managed to ensure their survival eating quite a varied diet. For anybody that says that humans are naturally vegetarian animals, I think nature and certainly science would disagree. Though admittedly the way we consume meat in our human world today is pretty terrible for the planet. So we should all make good choices about where the meat we're eating is coming from. It certainly shouldn't be feedlots and factory farms. Mindy Tilpow, good morning and happy birthday to you. Mindy says she would love to see a giraffe. Mindy, you've just missed the giraffes at Old Donyo. But if they do pop out again or on one of our other feeds, we will definitely pop back over there and have another look. Thanks for joining us. I mentioned in an earlier segment that trooper baboons may number up to 100 individuals in size. Right at the top of the hierarchy in such a group, there'll be 5 or 6 very dominant males, with one male holding pole position right at the top. A super aggressive, very dominant adult male. But in amongst that group, or a gang even, of quite violent, aggressive males, there's constant infighting for pole position, for that top role, and certainly for all of the benefits that come along with it. Being the top of the hierarchy, that is the individual that gets the most grooming done. It certainly takes the lion's share of all of the prime food should a kill be made, or should something interesting like a bird's nest be discovered. And of course, that pole position means that that individual gets the lion's share of all of the mating as well. So, as I say, males fight constantly for that role. But a secret to baboon society, and kind of an unwritten rule, is that a baboon is not allowed to attack another baboon if that individual is carrying a baby. So if a fight does break out, it's quite well documented that males will actually kidnap the infant of a lower ranking female and hold it on their body, have it like a human shield, in the hopes that it'll prevent them from getting beaten up. So talk about higher intelligence. That is a very smart, if slightly cruel strategy. And they are, yeah, supremely interesting to watch. Definitely prefer to see them out in nature. You don't want to be in the position of having them hanging around in your lodge, breaking windows, coming into rooms, raiding kitchens. But out in the bush, they are fabulous. They're also, of course, famous for their fairly bare bottoms, which are naturally thickened pads of tissue. And they're actually born with them, but they get even bigger and even thicker as the baboon matures. And they do quite a bit of sitting as they feed, so hence the need for those sort of cushions to sit on. But anyway, they're not as colourful as they're often portrayed in animations and that sort of thing. The very colourful bottoms are on a species known as the mandrill, which is a cousin of these chacma baboons, but once again found along the equator. I think the mandrill baboon was kind of the inspiration for Rafiki in The Lion King, Rafiki the witch doctor. So yeah, it's the mandrills that have the very colourful bottoms. These chacmas tend to be fairly plain in colour, though the tissue in that bottom, in the female chacmas, does become quite swollen and inflamed, so it takes on a bit of a pink colour when they are ovulating, when they are in heat. And that is a very visual indication to the males that will tell them that those females are available for mating. But anyway, we may leave these naughty baboons and head back once again down to Tembe National Park, or Tembe Elephant Park, down in KwaZulu-Natal. So back over at Tembe, once again, an abundance of elephants as well as other plains game species. And maybe we'll even get a view of a giraffe here. We certainly have been seeing giraffes here lately. Oh, and a nice warthog popping out at the water's edge there. Certainly, variety is the order of the day today. A particularly magnificent elephant bull, I would say, probably in the prime of his life, based on his size and his physical development. So he's really only just come into the prime of his life. With quite a large body, a big head, quite a nice set of tusks. I'm sure this is a popular bull with the local females. The female elephants are notoriously fussy when it comes to choosing a mate. And given any selection at all, they generally won't mate with a male that's under about 30 or 35 years of age. Keeping in mind, elephant bulls hit puberty at the same sort of time that human males do, so somewhere between, I guess, as low as 12 and maybe as late as 16, 17, 18, somewhere there. And that's when all the testosterone starts pumping around their bodies. They start to get bigger, heavier. So if you do the maths, from 18 to 35, that is a long, frustrating period in which the cows are just not interested. But Ellie bulls form these bachelor groups, and thankfully there are at least other males in those groups in similar conditions, so they're able to kind of jostle around to spar and to take out those frustrations constructively on one another. Yeah, I guess essentially you can understand why the elephant cows are quite fussy when it comes to mate selection. Essentially, an elephant cow has the longest gestation period of any mammal to walk anywhere on land at 22 months, following which, that is the beginning of basically a lifelong commitment between mother and calf. So she only wants the very best genetic material possible to construct big, healthy babies. And they do make phenomenal mums. Possibly some of the best mums in nature. 2 warthogs now, at least. Warthogs are actually quite a sensitive species in terms of environmental conditions. They have to have access to fresh greenery to feed on and lots of water. So they are one of those telltale species. Should an environment be under stress, if rain has been quite disappointing, food is in short supply, warthogs tend to be some of the first to show signs of suffering and dying in droughts. Things like warthogs, kudu, and buffalo are particularly good indicator species. So big healthy warthogs tells us Tembe is doing very well. Hello Leon, nice to have you guys on board. And as far as the lung capacity of an elephant, I'm not 100% sure. Certainly they're big, bigger than the lungs of anything else out here. Mindy Tilpau has asked, and I apologize if I've mispronounced your surname there, Mindy. Will the plants in the water eventually die off, and do they affect the oxygen levels in the water? So, Mindy is, for anybody who hasn't been watching in recent episodes, Mindy is chatting about this floating layer of vegetation, which is actually an alien invasive species accidentally introduced to many of Southern Africa's waterways from South America. It is a water cabbage. It's pretty horrible stuff, and under the right conditions, which are being provided here in Tembe, plenty of water, lots of heat, lots of sunshine, it grows like a weed. And gradually it forms a solid carpet over the entire water's surface, quite critically blocking out all of the sunlight, which can be pretty disastrous for many of the environmental processes going on in the lives of countless little species of invertebrates and fish and amphibians and all sorts of things living in this water. So, Mindy, I don't think it actually takes oxygen out of the water. Quite the opposite. I think it puts a bit of extra oxygen in, as is very often the case with water plants, aquatic plants. But the effect of blocking out all the sun is quite bad, and certainly it does just choke up these waterways. It's not poisonous or anything. It is palatable to some degree, so the animals could eat it if they wanted to. It is, however, very fibrous. The bodies of those plants have evolved to be sort of hollow, air-filled and fibrous in order to allow them to float. So yeah, those characteristics make it unpalatable. It's not so tasty. So unfortunately, the only way really to get rid of it is to spray chemicals, herbicides, which obviously I don't think they want to do in this area, or possibly to take it out by hand. Obviously, a huge task though, and quite risky in one of these wilderness areas if crocodiles do occur. I don't know, there may also be some potential to introduce a parasite or something that specifically targets it, but you always play with fire a little bit when you introduce another alien species into the environment, an environment in which it doesn't belong, to target one thing, because obviously once it's done its job, it may in all likelihood move on and start feeding on something else that it shouldn't. We've learned that in places like Australia. Australia historically, for one example, had big issues with little cane beetles feeding in sugarcane plantations. So somebody had the genius idea to introduce cane toads, a species of frog, in order to eat these cane beetles. But what nobody realized is the cane beetles are quite toxic. So as soon as the frogs were dropped, I don't think a single beetle was eaten, and the frogs multiplied into the billions. It's now a plague that's taking over Australia in a lot of places. The frogs are toxic, so nothing really can eat them. And they're actually so toxic, in fact, that when something eats one accidentally, it's actually killed. And now it's sort of at plague level proportions, and now very, very, very difficult to control. So yeah, as I say, we've got to be careful in our human activities not to mess up the ecological system out here, not to mess up the balance. Hence why some of these countries you may visit, if you are a traveler, are so strict when it comes to bringing in things like fruit and untreated wood, animal products, that sort of thing. They don't want bugs and disease and that sort of thing to spread. Yeah, we certainly have been blessed with quite a variety of views this afternoon, as is so often the case here at Live at the Waterhole, and that is the great benefit of having so many feeds in so many different locations. You get a really nice cross section of biodiversity across the entire continent of Africa. And that is also the beauty of planning a safari out to Africa to a couple of different parks in a single trip. A lot of the stuff you are looking at, and certainly the landscape, the vegetation, is likely to be quite different. This continent and even this country, South Africa, has so much to offer. It's quite easy in like a 5-day stay to not only do a couple of safaris in search of exciting wildlife, but to also see some pretty spectacular coastlines, some beautiful beaches with warm oceans. You can even ski in Lesotho, and then spend a day or two in the wine country down in the Cape. Yeah, it's pretty magical that all of that stuff is within a 1 or 2 hour flight of one another. And in many ways, I think sustainable ecotourism does offer a realistic future for a lot of these areas. Tourist dollars, of course, bring an amount of protection for the wildlife. If you out there as visitors bring that money in, it can be spread out over the conservation operations that prevent things like snaring and ivory and rhino horn poaching, ensuring that these environments stay alive and still exist for future generations. So if you have the means, please travel. Yeah, there's a wonderful quote, and who exactly wrote it, unfortunately, escapes me. But the quote goes, "The only man I envy is he who has not yet been to Africa, for he has so much to look forward to." And I think that's quite apt. There is so much magic on this continent. And if you are passionate about wildlife and nature, there is arguably no better place on the planet to come eye to eye with some of this planet's greatest creatures. It has certainly been my life for at least the last 12 years, and I guess possibly a bit more. And I certainly can't imagine being and doing anything else. Sandy Franklin 69, good afternoon. Sandy asks, what would you do if you walked into your tent and there was a baboon in there? So Sandy, you've certainly got to be quite careful. Baboons, as mentioned in an earlier segment, have the potential to be quite dangerous things. And especially if trapped in a corner, they have the potential to inflict very serious injuries on humans. They're not generally aggressive towards us. I think most of the time they would prefer to get out of the way. But yeah, certainly, and I guess trap any animal in a corner has the potential to be dangerous. But I guess your best bet would be to ensure that baboon has an exit route. So don't stand in the doorway, possibly go outside and maybe bang on the side of the tent, try and scare it out. But yeah, at all of these lodges and kind of places you can stay in these wilderness areas, you're always advised to keep your windows and doors closed, because those baboons and the vervet monkeys are very opportunistic, always looking for an opportunity to raid a minibar. So quite a nice example of the visual difference between male and female nyala. We've got two female nyala on the opposite side of the bank, and a young, slightly subadult male closer to the warthog here. Now this male is by no means fully grown, he's still quite a small guy. When he's fully mature, he will almost dwarf those nyala ewes on the other side in size. But take a look at the visual difference. The male has that lovely, almost silvery coat, a big waterbuck appearing in the foreground. But the male has that almost silvery, shaggy coat, and the female's much more rusty red color. And a very handsome looking waterbuck there. One of our bigger antelope species. This guy looks a little on the leaner side, certainly looking slightly skinny. I'm not 100% sure why that would be. Maybe he's got some internal parasites or some unseen difficulty. But he's certainly in the right place to have an easy-ish go of things. There's lots of water and lots of food around the waterhole here at Tembe. Alrighty, well, I think time to check in with another location we have yet to visit on this Live at the Waterhole show. So let's head up to Victoria Falls, also in Zimbabwe, to have a look at the waterhole up there. So back in Zimbabwe once again, at the Victoria Falls Safari Lodge waterhole, and what an interesting scene this is. There's a large Nile crocodile sitting in the water quite close to the Marabou stalk on sort of that peninsula. A couple of warthogs, a few more marabous. Certainly an interesting scene from my home country of Zimbabwe. Yeah, this northernmost part of Zimbabwe, certainly the Zambezi River, areas such as Lake Kariba, are famous for some of the largest Nile crocodiles that occur in southern Africa. A few individuals occasionally reaching as much as 5 meters in length, possibly even a bit more, and around about 1 metric ton in terms of weight. Without a doubt, one of the top apex predators in the environment. Yeah, something that I have a very healthy respect and possibly even moving into a slight phobia for. You certainly don't ever want to find yourself in deep water with a large Nile croc. They are one of the few species on this planet that actively hunt humans as a source of food. And while other animals, lions, leopards, tigers, that sort of thing, occasionally eat people, we still, under most normal circumstances, seem to have the upper hand. Those animals have a fear for us. A crocodile, though, keeping an eye on it walking along the bank, takes a look at our body and the way we move, and actively observes us as a food source and stuff. Diane in the UK says, really wish I could afford to travel to your beautiful country. So glad I can experience it through Wild Earth. Thanks very much, Diane. Yeah, you are certainly doing your bit to support wildlife and the natural world simply by taking an interest. Well, the natural world, after all, is something that, whether we know it or not, connects absolutely every one of us as humans on this planet. And I guess to some degree it is, it's the one thing that we all have in common. Joan, happy to hear you like the croc. Yeah, as scary as they certainly are very impressive. I do find them very interesting. I've mentioned in earlier shows that those sort of bony protuberances down that crocodile's spine, which are sometimes referred to as scales, are in fact something called osteoderms. So if you break that long word down, osteo, bone, a derm, skin. So it is quite literally skin that has ossified, has calcified, it's turned to bone. Now, quite amazingly, if you look at an X-ray of a crocodile, it is absolutely covered in these bony plates. I've actually found a really interesting photograph, which I will share to my Instagram story, of those crocodile osteoderms, obviously from a deceased crocodile, that have all been lined up. I'll share that to my Instagram, so go and have a look at Liam Burrow Wildlife. I'll share it there in a minute. But yeah, those osteoderms, or those bony plates, serve to protect that crocodile, and certainly when they fight one another, and fights between males in particular can be extremely violent. They regularly lose legs. Also, I'm sure there is some added benefit of protection when they do grab onto the muzzle or the front leg of something like a wildebeest or a zebra, that they don't get their back broken. But yeah, I'll put that picture up now. Yeah, and that is certainly no small crocodile as well. I would estimate him, based on the size of that head, to be about 3.5 to possibly 4 meters long, around about 12 foot, possibly slightly less. Certainly enough that if it was to grab you as a human being, it would be strong enough to pull you into the water and make a meal of you. Bobby Miller asks, do crocs and birds get along? Bobby Miller, to some degree, yes. And in recent episodes, we've even watched the crocodiles at the Tower waterhole in Madikwe in South Africa, kind of fishing in tandem with a number of water birds there. But keep in mind, birds are very much on the menu for crocs. In truth, there isn't a whole lot that isn't on the menu for a large Nile crocodile. Again, though, about 70% of what they eat is usually made up of fish. and there are generally plentiful catfish and tilapia populations in many of these waterholes, even the small ones. So there's usually quite a bit for the crocs to eat. But being ambush predators and very opportunistic animals, they also feed on birds, other reptiles like snakes, tortoises, occasionally even smaller crocodiles. They are cannibalistic. And then, of course, birds and mammals. And the mammals include ourselves. Joan Mello, no, I actually haven't seen a crocodile here at the Victoria Falls waterhole before, so that's a very nice surprise. But yeah, again, we know that crocs can travel quite vast distances over land in search of, whoop, there's a kudu, in search of new places to live. If the waterhole they are living in starts to dry up, it's well documented that they'll travel at least 100 kilometers, even on those very short, stubby little legs, to find a new place to live. So you just never know where they're going to pitch up. They just seem to arrive sometimes. But yeah, I did share that crocodile osteoderm photo to my Instagram story, so check it out at _wildlife. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating and actually quite beautiful, if I may say. And now this Mopani woodland in which the kudu is kind of strolling through at the moment is a pretty difficult landscape in which they are actually trying to survive. As you can see, it's a bit of a monoculture. There's not a whole lot of other stuff growing here. And while this Mopani plant is palatable to some degree, it's very low in nutrient value. And as a result, quite a few animals just avoid it completely. Yeah, the rainfall certainly hasn't been as good this year at Vic Falls as it has been down at Tembe or Old Donyo. So the animals are in for a tough dry season. Yeah, I mentioned in an earlier segment I actually grew up in central Zimbabwe, a couple of 100 kilometers south of Victoria Falls here. But when I was a little kid, my sister as well, slightly younger sister, my family hired, I guess, an au pair as well as a housekeeper to look after us while my parents were busy sort of running their wildlife business. And anyway, this lady looked after us, a wonderful lady by the name of Shami. She looked after us for many, many years. And anyway, when we got a little bit larger, she went back up to Victoria Falls here somewhere to join her family. And unfortunately, very shortly after she left us, she actually lost her life to a crocodile up here somewhere. So, certainly human-wildlife conflict and crocodile attacks on people are an issue. With many African people in rural areas coming down to the water's edge to bathe, perhaps to wash clothes, and with lacking plumbing in their own homes, even to collect drinking water, they come into something of a danger zone. And in truth, maybe even as much as 2,500 people are killed by crocs in Africa each year. So if you spend any time around the water's edge in a place like Africa, certainly tread very carefully. Keeping in mind, a 1-ton, 15-foot Nile crocodile can disappear in as little as a foot and a half of dirty water, where it can lie motionless without even needing to breathe for as much as an hour and a half, waiting for something to come close enough to be captured. Yeah, so lots of you are reacting to that crocodile osteoderm picture that I shared to my Instagram, Borough Wildlife. It is a very, very cool thing. Isn't nature miraculous? Our crocodile doing a little bit of moving. We might even be lucky enough to get him up on land. So crocs, once again, being ectothermic, in layman's terms, cold-blooded. They need an external source of heat in order to regulate their own body temperature. And a croc will achieve that by systematically basking on nice rocks and nice sunny banks. And if we do get a couple of overcast days, the crocodiles with very low uncharged batteries, if you will, tend to be very sluggish. They don't do a lot of hunting. The skin goes quite dark. And yeah, I guess that is true of many, if not all, reptile species. Yeah, that bird that's just finished up its drink at the water's edge is a hardy-dar ibis. It's a very common resident throughout South Africa, even in the very urbanized areas, even in the cities. It's an often maligned, and I think across South Africa anyway, a lot of people have some very negative feelings towards the hardy-dars, but they are nice things. I think people's distaste for them comes down to the noise they make. Yeah, it's quite a shrill call, which they will occasionally make in the very early hours of the morning, sat on your suburban roof. But yeah, I think the world would be a far sadder place if we didn't have the sounds of birds. And of course our undertakers, the marabou storks. So as mentioned in an earlier show, I think we chatted about them quite extensively yesterday. Undertaker type birds, almost exclusively on carrion, dead meat, a bit like the vultures. And they will feed on a couple of other things, fish trapped in pools, occasionally insects. I suppose if they could find bird eggs, a baby crocodile, something like that, they would probably eat it. But their real specialty is feeding on carcasses. And they serve a very vital role in these natural systems to clean up dead and decaying animal material. They can even consume the flesh of an animal that has died from something like anthrax, a very, very serious thing. And they can completely neutralize that anthrax, stopping the spread, a spread which can kill hundreds of other animals at a time. Joan Mello says, thank you, Wild Earth and Liam. Good show today. All of you are so pleasant. Love interacting with all of you. Have a good Sunday. And the same to you, Joan Mello. Always nice to chat to you as we go. And be sure to join us again sometime soon. Yeah, as we approach the final few minutes before 2:30 in the afternoon and the close of the Live at the Waterholes show, what an interesting afternoon it has been, with a proper variety. Yeah, we've seen all sorts today. But yeah, with about 2 minutes to go before the close of the show, from the entire team at Africam and Wild Earth, all of the people making the magic happen unseen behind the scenes, from our directors at Tadiwa initially, and Gwyn in the latter half, as well as myself, naturalist Liam Burrow. It's been the most phenomenal pleasure. Another one of our Wild Earth naturalists will be taking over from me for the next 3 or 4 days, I think, but I'll be joining you a little bit later on. So yeah, be sure to keep tuning in here and getting your fix of African wildlife through the day. But wherever you are out there, I hope your Sunday is going extremely well. Hope you've got some nature nearby. But have a wild remainder of the weekend, and we'll check you sometime soon. But from all of us and our Marabou Stalk undertakers, for now, this is goodbye.
Well, a very good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for joining us once again for our highlight show here, coming from a Djuma Private Game Reserve in the northern Sabi Sands here in South Africa. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cedric, and behind the camera with me, we've got Muscles and Paul. So yes, it's going to be a lovely highlight show. There's a couple of clips that we do